On this episode of Carpe Diem, food security. Canadians want to support local producers. How can we be assured the supply will meet our demands? Experts Lana Popham, Tim Lambert, and Dane Chauvel talk food.
Carpe diem, seizing the day for Canadians as we age.
Welcome. Do you know where our food comes from? How much of it is locally produced? And is it sustainable to want to support and feed ourselves just from our local farmer next door? Well, I spoke to a person who has answers and solutions to some of these very real challenges. BC Agriculture Minister Lana Popham. So I asked her, how much of our food is actually imported?
We do about 40%, just over 40% of BC food we supply for ourselves. The rest we import from places like California and Mexico. And when you look at any of the disruptions that can happen in places like that, California suffering a drought, we have the opportunity to fill those gaps ourselves, but it takes planning. So agriculture is not something you can turn around overnight. I always equate it to trying to turn a giant cruise ship around. It's hard to get going, but once you get going, as long as the supports are in place, it really starts to move. And I think that we've started to see that. And I think the pressures around the pandemic will start to see that move even faster now.
So do you feel now that this system, this new way of shopping, the producer to my table, that's pretty well going where it needs to go?
There's always room for expansion there. But at the same time, we're also partnering with larger retail outlets. And we're making Buy BC partnerships with them. And so not everybody can get to a farmer's market, and they depend on their local grocer for their supplies. And so what we've done is we've partnered and made the labeling very clear what products are coming from British Columbia. So again, it's the Buy BC logo. And retailers like Safeway and Thrifties, Save on Foods is coming online. They will have these displays that show consumers and make it very easy for them to choose. You know, it's interesting because we all have the idea that spring and summer and fall are the bounties for agriculture. But really, we do a lot of processing and a lot of putting away for the winter. And that includes our apple growers who grow tons of apples in the Okanagan, and they store over the winter. So you can really eat a variety, probably more than any of us would really imagine, a variety of BC products right through the entire year. And in our retailers, if you go into the freezer section, you will see a huge choice of frozen BC berries. Those are almost always there. And so when you go into a retailer like that and you see imported berries out on a display that are fresh, and you might want to consider that if you go and buy those frozen BC berries, you're getting an amazing product. It doesn't take very long for them to thaw out. They're very nutritious, and they're supporting our community. So it's little choices like that make a big difference. And that's where the Buy BC logo and the marketing material comes into the retailers. But of course, there's always a way to try and make an effort to get to know your farmer, get to know the farm where you're purchasing from, whether it is from a retailer or a farmer's market. And I think as we make those connections, we start to make more conscious choices to support local.
We'll keep coming back to Minister Popham throughout the show. Now I want to show you a story by videographer Kier Junos, who discovers the importance of local produce and pollinators.
And you got a thing of smoke there or something.
This is a smoker. Smoke calms the bees.
Smoke calms the bees, okay. So I guess I'll be okay, huh?
You'll be okay.
You know, bees are pretty crucial to basically every kind of produce that you can think of, right?
Yeah. Particularly in the Fraser Valley, where we're growing a lot of fruit.
Canada relies heavily on food imports, despite being one of the world's biggest food producers. But with the COVID-19 pandemic interrupting supply chains worldwide, the conversation around local food independence is becoming more and more prevalent.
A recent report forecasts price increases on vegetables and bakery items, and a dropping Canadian dollar, often tied to oil, will make imported food more expensive.
Food independence. What do you think of that?
I think it's good to have a staple amount of food locally grown, so that if something happens in another country that you're depending on for, let's say, your staple foods.
And the goats will be there for people to, have a little corn or feed the goats.
It's been quite difficult, actually, because we depend on doing things like having a food truck over, or even having live entertainment or things like that. We depend on having people come to the farm to buy vegetables and fruits, and also with the new cider we opened. Not that we can buy everything that we eat locally, but what we do grow well is things such as beef, or the vegetables that we grow in the greenhouse industry, or even the field crops in the summertime that come on.
So if there are no bees coming in, so that commercial beekeepers can put their bees into blueberries, raspberries, cranberries, there's got to be a reduction in pollination. But you'd have to talk to the berry growers to know for sure.
But last year and this year, there's been a low supply of honeybees. But if a farm is not having the same amount of population of bees that they've had from previous years, they definitely will have lower yields, and they'll have less food for the community.
Wow. Efficient pollination by honeybees is responsible for 30% of the world's food supply. For Carpe Diem, I'm Kier Junos.
Let's go back to Minister Popham to find out what the BC government is doing for local beekeepers.
We created this program called BBC, and it's pots of money for community groups to do research and to do projects to improve the health of honeybees specifically. And we've seen amazing take up over the last 2.5 years. Many projects are being done around the province. And I couldn't be happier, because without bees, we would be suffering a lack of food for sure. There's also an amazing project that's going on out in the Fraser Valley that verifies honey, because there's this other problem with honey right now, and it's fraudulent honey, where honey is mixed with sugars and syrups, and so it's not actually authentic honey that you could be buying off the shelves. So there's this great company out in the Fraser Valley that has a honey verification system. And so we're trying to use our Buy BC label on verified BC honey, so you can be sure when you're buying honey that you know where it's coming from. And we have a ton of beekeepers in British Columbia. So it's a great project to work on. I love bees so much. We even have the day of the honeybee at the legislature. We've had for the first time over the last couple years. So, and we have a honey fair that goes on. So it's an incredible file that I absolutely love. It's dear to my heart.
When we come back, we're going to show you how the egg industry is ensuring that we always have those little gems in the fridge.
Still ahead on Carpe Diem.
I think that you will see Canadians coming out of this more and more interested in where their food comes from.
Carpe Diem. Seizing the day for Canadians as we age.
Welcome back. Eggs are a wonderful source of inexpensive, high-quality protein. I reached out to Tim Lambert, Egg Farmers of Canada CEO, and asked him, how are they going to keep up with demand?
Well, and consumers may see more flats of medium-sized eggs, so not in the regular cartons they're used to seeing. Those are exactly the same quality of eggs, so just smaller in size. Most likely produced by younger birds. So we rapidly increased that. So there have been some temporary shortages. You know, when you've got a supply chain that's organized to consumer picks up X number of eggs typically a week, and all of a sudden they're grabbing 2, 3, or 4 cartons, absolutely has a short-term impact. But things are starting to normalize now. You'll be pleased to hear.
A lot of changes have happened in your industry. And what new implementations do you see staying forever?
I think that you will start to see in farming, I think you'll see increased automation in processing plants. I think you'll see that across the meat industry. I think that you will see Canadians coming out of this more and more interested in understanding where their food comes from, understanding how food is produced. This notion that we've talked about during this interview of food security, I think will be a more or less permanent thing. I think that, and it links, we haven't really talked about it yet, but you know, at the core of rural communities and agriculture has always been a pretty profound sense of community, of working together. And so highlighting the need to support one another, I think that becomes a part of this. I know that we've so far donated roughly 2 million eggs to food banks around the country. By the end of the year, that'll be approaching 6 million eggs. And so we effectively doubled or tripled our contributions to try to support this. So I think interest in food, food security, awareness, automation and technology, I think are all here to, they've already been here, not here to stay, but I think they will garner increasing attention going forward.
I'm thrilled to hear Tim talk about 6 million eggs being donated to the food bank. Let's go back to Minister Popham and find out how the BC government is supporting the egg industry.
We've put in a program that has changed everything. And so it's called Feed BC. And Feed BC is a way of moving more grown and processed products through our health institutions like hospitals and long-term care, seniors facilities. And so I'll give you this great example in Penticton. So Penticton Hospital became our first partner with our ministry in Feed BC. And they made a conscious decision to start buying more BC product. They have a kitchen within their hospital. They buy about 600,000 shelled eggs a year. That's a lot of eggs. And they weren't necessarily buying them from British Columbia. So with the Feed BC, we make an agreement, if it's possible, try and choose a BC product. So they started last year buying only BC eggs. And the reason why we knew it was successful is because the BC egg industry contacted us and said, thank you so much. We have noticed a difference. So that is food that we're buying anyway. We have to buy food for our hospital system. So if we make the effort to buy BC food, that's a lot of meals every year that can help farmers.
Buy BC eggs. We're going to take a short break, but don't go away. When we come back, we're talking seafood.
Still ahead on Carpe Diem.
What we have said is that not only did the coronavirus inspire us to create a new business channel, but it has actually raised our game in terms of how we run our operation.
Carpe Diem. Seizing the day for Canadians as we age.
Welcome back. In March 2020, supply chains were disrupted all across the food industry. Many had to adapt by starting to sell online. The BC government came up with some helpful initiatives for the fish industry. A lot of these small producers, because they're small, needed some financial assistance, so you threw some money at the problem too, didn't you?
We did. And so we put out some money so that they could create their own platforms for e-commerce. And it's funny, the funding we put out there, we didn't know how much take up there would be, because it's quite a step forward into the future to get some farms and farmers to take up this opportunity. But the funding actually was oversubscribed within 2 hours. And so we knew at that point that, yeah, we had hit the mark on this one. We had a halibut fisherman contact us right away, and a tuna fisherman. And so they actually sell directly from their boats, and they hadn't moved on to the e-commerce platform as of yet, but now they're taking advantage of it. So you'll see consumers being able to purchase local BC food in a new way, and I think they're going to purchase a lot more of it.
We can now buy our favorite seafood online. I reached out to Dane Chauvel and asked him what his industry has done to ensure that we keep getting our seafood safely.
We've been asked this same question by government agencies and regulators that are overseeing the health and safety of food processing facilities, which has been very topical in the media these days. And what we have said is that not only did the coronavirus inspire us to create a new business channel, but it has actually raised our game in terms of how we run our operation. We were amongst the very first to recognize what was happening. It enabled us to get PPE before the rest of the pack. We outfitted our workers with that equipment in order to keep them healthy and safe so that they could keep the seafood supply chain running. And those procedures that we have implemented and protocols, I think they're going to stay. I think they're going to survive the corona pandemic. We're going to do a better job. Again, it's one of these silver linings of this very gray coronavirus cloud.
Dane, now that I have access to your products, I have them delivered to my home. Is that something that I can look forward to continuing to have access to after this is over?
As I mentioned, we had intended to go into this space because people that would eat our seafood in restaurants would constantly contact us and say, how can I get it? And we had never really made it available through a retail or a consumer channel. We'd contemplated doing it. We were now forced into doing it. Now that we're doing it, the feedback has been so positive that this is going to become a very important element of our business. For the time being, we're subsidizing this operation because we haven't been able to backfill all the business that we would have done through food service. But when we come out the other end of this storm, this direct-to-home delivery service that you can buy through our online store is going to become a very important element of our overall business. So the answer to your question is yes, we will continue to supply you with the same seafood that the pros covet, and we will continue to do it on a very affordable and favorable basis because we think that we've proven that model and that formula during this period.
On that reassuring note, we're going to take a short break. When we come back, videographer Kier Junos visits some specialty meat farms in the Fraser Valley.
Still ahead on Carpe Diem.
We buy direct a lot, so there is no middleman. They're not bringing stuff in over borders.
Carpe Diem. Seizing the day for Canadians as we age.
Welcome back. The theme of this show, consume local products. How are specialty meat farmers doing? Kier Junos finds out.
It makes it very, very difficult for farmers. It's too few slaughterhouses and they're owned by such big corporations that when something happens, it closes off a third of beef production.
Global food producers are facing supply chain disruptions due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Canadian meat producers are among those affected, and it spurred a conversation around local food independence.
Well, I'm kind of in a unique position. I actually used to be in supply chain management for grocery stores, and now I'm in farming. So I see it from both ends. Currently, we have shortages in processing facilities. We are having plants here locally as well that are having to do 14-day closures and things like that because of outbreaks locally.
Cargill's 2 facilities in Alberta and Ontario make up 55% of beef processing in Canada. The plant in High River, Alberta had recently closed for 2 weeks after a large outbreak.
What kind of things have you done around the farm to make sure that the animals stay safe, that your workers stay safe?
Well, we're in constant communication with our processing facilities just to make sure that if anything does come up that we know right away so that we can try and act accordingly. We also are making sure that when we are going to our processing facilities, we have to fill out paperwork, they check our temperature when we arrive, we have to wear masks and gloves and all of that kind of thing to help keep their staff safe.
How would you describe the value that consumers can reap from shopping for local goods?
Well, you get more food security. Like we see at the grocery stores, they're limiting the number of packages of eggs or chicken breasts. And when you're finding local farms that you can partner up with and support, oftentimes you're able to somewhat skip some of those issues.
Because most of what we source is local, we haven't really seen the supply chain issue. We buy direct a lot, so there is no middleman. We're not bringing stuff in over borders. Like, I know I can still access food.
Producers like Central Park are among many other farms who have changed the way that they feed their community. For Carpe Diem, I'm Kier Junos.
Every food producer that we've spoken to has asked us to support them. I asked Minister Popham to weigh in on that.
If you want to become more resilient overall, to support your local farmers, your fishers, your processors, allows for us to have this resilience that will help us into the future, no matter what challenges come before us. And so what we're trying to do is make sure that we have this network that's built, which is a food system. You don't normally hear agriculture described as a system, but it's a food system that there's support for on-the-ground primary growers, there's access to land, there's a way to get that food into market, there's a way to distribute it, and there's a recognition from consumers to buy it. So if that system is working well, if a disruption comes along like a pandemic, each region still has some resiliency as far as food security goes. And I think that's really got to be the goal right across Canada.
We've heard from all our guests that the best thing that we can do is shop for local foods. We get great products, we keep our money in our communities. I think that's a win-win for everyone. I want to thank my guests, Tim, Dane, and of course, Minister Popham. If you want to see a conversation happen here, get in touch. And that's the show. Remember, as our Carpe president, Moses Neimer, always says, the best way to keep going is to keep going. So, Carpe Diem and seize your day.